Let's now utilize all that knowledge we picked up so far to rig an arm. What is important to understand, there are many ways to rig an arm, and what suits me doesn't necessarily have to suit you. It all depends what do you want, what kind of a setup you want, what kind of functionality you need. And of course, depending on the amount of functionality, that's how complex the setup can be. If you will be rigging for animators, it is really good idea to ask them what they prefer, what kind of setups and controls they prefer, and build them that way. And once again, rigging is all about creating simple and versatile setup. This is pretty much all there is to it when it comes to rules. How technically you will do that is completely up to you. We discussed in Volume 1 the topology of the polygon meshes, and in this case, we just doodle it for you. Here, if you take a look at these three loops, I left much more space here than here. And why is that? The reason is because when the arm goes in the upright position, the most upright position, something like this, I want to have space here between those vertices so they don't clash or overlap. Same for the other side. I want to have space here because these vertices have to have some space to stretch. I don't want them to clash with this one. So I think this is pretty simple to understand. This is really, really important. And let me just delete this doodle guide. And as you can see, I have really, really low amount of loops on this mesh. My suggestion is to utilize the minimum amount of geometry you can work with. You can also see some example of upscaling here from lower polygon count to higher polygon count. Simply, I cannot represent that shape with this kind of geometry, this amount of geometry, so I have to have additional information here. One more thing to notice is that I deliberately did this hand to be in this position. It's not in a standard T position, so I can utilize some of the freezing features instead of 4D. And also I will show you how to solve some problems we will run into when we will rig this arm. So nothing fancy, this is a simple polygon mesh, and we have a hypernerves as our subdivision tool. The first thing we have to do, we have to build joints on the places that are really, really logical. So for example, here would be one, here would be a shoulder joint, here would be a wrist joint. So logically, that's what should we do. You can see I already selected the edge loops where the joints should be. And many people do actually go into trouble making joints manually. This is not really a good idea. So for example, if you go here and select the joint tool, and you can paint some joints inside something like this, but this is not really precise. We just hide the mesh. I will take this out. Since I had a little bit of practice, I turned off the joints so you can actually see them now. The problem is this is not really precise. You can see it came out from the shoulder. It's not really precise. It's really, really bad. Although this joint tool in release 12 has this projection feature, which will try really to fit those joints inside the volume of the polygon mesh, there is much more better way to do this. Let me just delete this. And the best way to do this is to select the actual loops where your joints should be and go character conversion. And if you will hold down the shift key and click on this selection to joints guide, watch what happens. It will create a joint exactly in the center for each of these loops. I believe this is much better way to work with joints. Naturally, I want to name them accordingly, so let me just select this for that first one. It should be called shoulder. The next, this is actually the wrist, and I'm just hitting the arrow down key so I can easily go into rename mode for the next selected object, and this should be the elbow, and just create the child-parent relationships. I'll also add a root. Now I can do that with the Alt-G command. It will put everything inside the null object. I will call it master control. So since I will be able to move everything with it, all the chain, you can see that. Actually, I really don't like this display of bones. I really like this line option. It will create a line between joints, and I will set a custom size for those joints, so something like, say, 8 would be enough. I believe that is good. So it's just a matter of workflow and my preference, nothing else. One thing that you really don't want to forget is to align the joints properly, and let me just hide this mesh for a bit, and you can see the z-axis is pointing in that direction. I actually want it to point down the chain, simply for the reasons we discussed in previous lessons. And I will select the first joint and go to my joint align tool, and I will simply hit align with defaults on, and you will see it aligned it down the joint chain on the z-axis. The next thing to do is we'll create a simple IK chain for the hand. So let's select the starting joint of the chain and the ending joint. We want to create the IK chain, and go commands, create IK chain, and once again it's all the same. It will create the IK tag and the wrist goal object. One thing that I will certainly need is the reset commands, and I believe I have them saved, so let's just see in the command manager. And in this case I will build a new palette, simply because when you save the file, the layout, if you create a custom palette and save it in some sort of a layout, it won't be saved with the file. So potentially you can run into a problem where you give a file to an animator and he simply doesn't have your layout and therefore has no controls. This is why I prefer heads-up display solutions for the preset switches, because it is saved with the file. But just for the sake of covering as much ground as we can, I will create a new palette and go with this solution this time. So we'll simply go into the edit palettes mode, and let's see what do we need. We need a reset position, that is for sure. So let's drag that guy inside, so reset position. And I will right click and also state that I want the text to be displayed, so I know what it is. And could really get rid of these icons, so I will simply uncheck these icons, and I will just have these simple buttons. We'll also need a reset rotation. We'll drag that too, and I believe this would be enough for now. We can later add to this palette. So we'll go out from edit palettes mode, close this guy, and you can simply dock this somewhere where you find it really works for you. For example, here, just over the attributes manager is just fine for me. I will also save this layout to be my startup layout. So every time I start Cine4D, this is the layout I will get. If some of you are really wondering why my axis is so small, I really prefer, if you go here on the edit configure all, you can set the size of that axis. So I scaled it down to 50%. I find it to be much more easier also to work with than a full 100% size of that axis. Okay, so that's it, and let's continue. And one thing that is also really important is get these values here under coordinates for those joints. They are really really random and really difficult to work with under rotation. So it is good idea if you middle click your mouse on this parent guy, you will select everything down through the hierarchy of children, and it is really good idea to freeze all transformations on joints before actually creating some additional controllers and the reset buttons and similar stuff. So let's freeze all, so we have nice clean values, and we will also do a freeze all for this wrist goal guy. So let's freeze all, so we have everything nice and clean. Another thing that you will surely do is you will change the display, you will change the shape of how those controllers, those null objects are represented in the viewport. You will change it to a, let's say, a cube or something else. You will change the size, you will change the color. But guess what? That is really tedious, and you have to click quite a few times to get what you want. And what I do often is I create a little script that does all that in a single click. I find it a lot easier. It really cuts down the time of creating those shapes. So let's build just that, and for this you will have to have this script log guy, simply because you want to see what's enough for the writes, what commands does it execute while creating that additional functionality. So let me just delete this all. I will select all and delete it. And if you don't see that script log, I have it docked in. You'll have to go to Window Layout, Command Manager, type here script log. You can actually start it and you'll get another window. Okay, so you can see I called the Command Manager. So everything, pretty much many things you change will be logged here, and there is a command number. So with this we can help ourselves build automated setups. So here under Script Manager, and if you go here under Window and or press the Shift plus F11 or simply start the Script Manager, you will get this same window here. I simply have it docked in my interface, in my layout. What you want to do, you want to create a new script, and we will call it standard controller. So it's pretty self-explanatory, and we will utilize this script log guy to help us build that. And this will be simply copying and pasting commands. So I want a standard controller that will be a cube. So here under display for our goal object, I will select a cube, and here I can see that command. Okay, so I will select that line, copy it with the right click, and simply paste it here in the new script. Okay, so that's the functionality I want. Next thing, I want the orientation. I want it to be XZ. So you see it simply logs the command. I will select this other command, simply copy that too, and paste it here in the script manager. Also, what I want is, I'll probably want to change the color for my object. So I will say here, use color on. And here under script log, you will see it also logs that command. So let's copy that guy too. So we just want faster way of things to work. So let's paste that back here in the script manager, and let's do a save also. It will save all scripts we made, all the changes we made. So save all. So now every time we create a controller, let's just put all those values back to default just to show you that it will do its thing and do it all automatically. And that standard controller script is a really perfect candidate to put here under our custom palette. So let's go Window, Layout, Command Manager. Let's find here our standard controller. Here it is, and we will activate these edit palettes and simply drag this guy here. uncheck this, and we have that standard controller script command on this palette. I really hope everyone is able to follow. So now every time you select a null object and you want to create that cube with a XZ orientation and an ability to change color, you will simply run this script. And you can see you got all that in a single click. Now you can simply change the color to something like, let's say, orangey. Pick your own colors that will suit you. So always try to find a way to automate and ease up on the workflow and avoid 5, 10 or 50 clicks if you can do it with a single one. Take the time to build these additional controllers and scripts. And actually, I believe we are now ready to bind the mesh to this joint chain. And it's always a good practice to test and double check everything up. So first, let's check the coordinates on this joint chain. So are they nice and clean values? And just as a side note, if you're using Cinema for the version before release 12, then you don't have these freeze transformations options, and the workaround is to use null object. So you will put parent null objects, so your actual things you want to have 0 coordinates have to be the child of those nulls. It will clutter a bit the hierarchy, but there is simply no way around. The best solution would be really to upgrade to release 12 if possible. Back to the check, we will double check. We have nice 0 values here. Let's check our master controller, and you can see we have some awkward values here in the position, and we will freeze that all. So we have a nice 0 value, and actually let's test our standard controller script once more. So we will simply click on it once and it will create a standard controller. And maybe this one should be a little bit bigger. So let's say something like 13. Just to know that this is the shoulder and this is the wrist. Just a matter of preference. So let's check our wrist goal, and it's all good. You see it's already frozen and we are ready to go. So now, just as in the previous lessons, we will select all of our joints and the mesh itself. We'll just unhide this and go character commands bind and connect them. And now if I select my goal object and try to move it, you will see that we actually have nice, really nice deformations, regardless that we didn't do any weight painting. Why is that? Well, the answer is good, proper topology. I'll reset the position of my controller and simply pull it a little bit upwards, and we'll solve our first problem. And our first problem is actually if you take a closer look in this area, it seems like it's losing volume, and I don't want an under skin deformer. You have an option to change the type of deformation. So let me try spherical, and you can see how it changed. Maybe this is too much. We'll go with blended, and maybe this 50% is too little. Let's try something a little bit more on the spherical side. Something like 75 should be good enough. And remember, in rigging, everything is up to you. You decide what will your rig look like, what functionalities will you have in the rig, how do you want it to behave. It's all up to you. There is no rules, there are just guidelines, and it is very bad idea to simply try to do some rig without any plan. It's really bad idea. You have to exactly know what you are going to do, otherwise you will be really frustrated. Also, if I orbit a scene a bit, you'll see that I have another problem, and That is the way this arm bends, and currently it bends like this, a little bit offset. I want it to be really straight on this line, if possible. Delete that. And to do that, we will play a bit with the pole vector. Pole vector is actually an object, a helper object that will just tell the IK chain where do you want your hand to point. So before doing anything, I will reset the position. You see how useful this is. Otherwise you would have to do some undos, and you would probably undo something that you don't want to undo. So that's major problem. So here under IK tag there is a pole vector option, and we will add a pole which we can actually control. So click on the add pole button, and here it is. You will find it under your root controller of your joint. So here it is, it's a shoulder pole. I'll drag it just a bit on this side and you see what happens. It really controls how the hand will be oriented. Look at this. We undo that. And currently, if you take a really close look, I'll just temporarily disable the visibility of the mesh, just to show you something. You see these two axes, they are pointing really at nothing, and you should always choose one of them to point at the pole vector. Otherwise you will have problems with flips and really weird stuff. So once again, let's select that IK tag and select here one of the axes. And I think the best advice that I can give you here is to select the one which looks at the pole vector most. So I suspect this X, but in the minus direction, is somewhat best oriented to that pole vector. So let's put minus X here and watch what happens. And now we have a really neat setup. The axis is aligned properly, and if you move your goal object, you will see it really follows that imaginary line, imaginary plane. Let's enable the mesh again and you will see that a little bit more clearly. So it's really good now. Reset that. One thing that I can now see, it's really difficult to select this pole vector here. So we will select it here and once again give it a standard controller display. So you can actually color it differently. So try to be somewhat of consistent. So this line is by default this pink color, so let's select that color here. The only thing I do before recording lessons, I actually pick these colors up just to cut down on the recording and the tutorial time. So now we have our controller set up. I think it should be a little bit smaller, and it's all up to you. Something around 5 would be just enough. And if I will move this controller, you'd see it controls the orientation of the hand. And not just that, it controls the flip of the hand. Let me show you that. If I'll pull this up, once I cross the line, so to speak, then the chain will flip. You see this? My goal object crossed the imaginary line and it simply flipped. And there are no flip setups, which can be pretty elaborate and include many constraints, but personally I think controlling the pole vector along with your controllers is the best way. So if you move this guy a little bit upwards, you actually have a little bit more flexibility this way than actually creating some elaborate setups like this. So you can actually control where that hand will point. You undo that, and I'm undoing because I haven't froze the transformations on this guy. You can see this in the coordinates manager. It's all weird, and if I will do a reset position, it will all break to pieces. So be aware of that. Freeze it once you create it, and now that position where it's frozen will be its 0 position. Let's undo this also. So reset position. So you always have a reset button. You can see this, actually this one, this main master controller should be a little bit bigger. So just to encompass all these shoulder areas, something like 20. So we are in some sort of a nice neat round numbers. And now once you created some sort of a basic setup, you will find the flaws in your rig. Find what is wrong. Find how you can break it so you can actually fix it. I can already see quite a few limitations in this rig, but now let me just show you a few of them and we will solve a few of them. And just to give you an idea what could limit you, what could be really a barrier for you. What if you want to move this guy? Let me show you the problem. You can see this. And if you move it outside of the limits, some sort of imaginary limits, then this guy, then this IK goal will be left behind. So let's undo that. And this one is pretty easily solvable. And here under IK tag, under advanced, just say constrain goal, and if you move this guy, it will always keep that goal. Simple as that. Let's reset the position and once again on this guy. But what if you want to move this guy, and once you hit the limit, you don't want it to pull that other controller, you want this one maybe to stay locked. So there are quite a few things that I want from this rig. And possibly I want a controller, let's say a switch, so I could completely move the whole arm. This is exactly what we are going to do. We will build our custom user data and create a lock for this guy and the ability to move everything. And this would be pretty much sufficient to get you on the right track. So let's first build our user data, and the first thing we will build is the, let's say, a master control switch. So we have the ability to move all. And I always tend to avoid many objects. So in this case here, you could actually create another group of objects and group all this under a single null and use that as a master controller. But I kind of avoid those setups simply because I want to minimize the amount of objects I have in a scene, and I want to minimize the amount of controllers that I have in my scene. So instead of having two controllers on the same place and additional slider here or some checkbox here, I would really want a switch on this controller. So this would be its normal behavior. I'll do that. Reset this. And if I enable a move everything checkbox, I want it to move the complete arm along with this guy, so everything would move, including this pole vector guy. Firstly, let's do what we have to do, and I want this control, this additional functionality to be on this master controller. So let's create a user data here. So we will add user data, and a simple checkbox is a Boolean type of data type. So let's call this some logical name. So move everything, and click OK, and here we have a little checkbox. And this is the easy part. The a little bit more difficult part is actually telling this guy to move everything. And in this case, solution is rather simple and provided here on this IK tag. And here it is, it says keep goal. So let me move this without that option. You can see it really doesn't move the complete setup. If I enable this keep goal and move this controller, you will see that this is the behavior I want. I want to move the complete setup. So let me undo that. The problem is I could easily drop this here in the viewport and have it accessible, but what if you have even two of these chains, maybe three, and you have three of these IK keep goal guys? How will you tell which one is it? Will you experiment every time? This is one feature that Maxon should really add. The ability to rename those guys would be an absolutely fantastic feature. And since we don't have in this version of Cinema that, we'll simply have to do it another way. And here comes the espresso to save us. I will select my master control. I have this move everything checkbox. I will add a simple espresso here. I won't even dock it for this. Something like this. So I want this master controller here, and I will find its user data. So I want this user data to output. When I click on this checkbox here, I want it to enable this keep go. It's really simple, and you cannot drag this setting inside Expresso. You will see a no-go sign, but you can drag the complete IK tag, and you can find all those settings here. So it's the same as here. So under advanced, you can find the keep go. Simply connect those two guys, and there we go. You can close that Expresso window, and now let's just test it out without this move everything checked. You will see this is the default behavior. So let's reset the position. Let's reset on this guy also, and if I enable this move everything, it will move the complete setup. And this is exactly what I want. So there you go, additional functionality. And now, once you have it here as your custom user data control, you can drag it here. And you have an ability to rename it and turn off display object. It will simply remove the name that it has in the hierarchy. It's really useful. You can always go here under user data and manage it and simply rename it to anything you want, so it seems logical. And since it's really accessible in the viewport, it can be really used and abused. One thing to bear in mind is if you deselect the object on which that control resides, it will not be visible in the viewport, but you can right click and say show always, and it will be visible no matter what. And again, here, those reset guys, you can have them in the HUD. You can have all this as a palette. It's really a matter of preference. I deliberately made those three controllers here, and I'll build one more because I want to have one more functionality for this hand. So let's build that one too. Suppose I want this guy to be able to move freely. What if I want to move this guy freely in certain, let's say, normal area of operation, but what if I want to lock this controller down? And by locking, I mean I want to pin it. I really want to freeze it in place. And the really quick and smart ones that are watching will say, okay, there is not a problem. You can add a tag which is called a protection tag in Cine 4D, and you will not be able to move it. You see, I'm really trying hard and I'm not able to move it. But watch what happens when I move the master controller. It overrides that. And that's the problem. That IK tag expression has higher priority than this protection guy. And I will try to dig out an example later in later lessons, maybe even in a bonus lesson about priorities, which is a really important thing also when something doesn't work as expected. So the priorities are here under every basic tab. You will see a priority and its value, but we will talk about this later. So that's a no-go with the protection tag. The protection tag works only if you're manipulating the object itself. Another solution would be to add an espresso tag. Let's just do that. Espresso tag and simply drop our risk goal and constant node. But the problem is just select the position here and now the object is actually locked. But let's see what happens if we will move this master controller. It will also override that. And that is the problem. We have to find another way to do this. So I'll just reset this risk goal and this master controller just to be on the safe side. And I will also select another color for it. So let's be consistent and use this same orange color. So something like this. So how do we set it up? How do we lock something inside Cinema4D? And since there is no really straightforward locking or freezing constraint, we will use a clamp constraint. And we will actually not freeze or lock or pin down this guy. We will just create sort of a relationship where the result will be the locking of this guy. We will actually constrain this shoulder master controller. So let's add a constraint tag in the clamp mode and we'll add a target, and in this case I want to constrain this master controller not to be able to move over this current distance as it is now. So it can move freely below this value. But once it reaches this distance, this is the actual maximum distance between those two joints, I want it not to be able to exceed that distance. And I want it to be in the origin mode, so it will clamp to origin of object, and that is the center of the axis. And let's drop the risk goal as our target here. And instead of fix, we will set this to maximum, so it cannot exceed this value. And Cinema4D is smart enough to put the distance, the actual distance between those two guys in this slot. So it calculated the distance for us. So now what happens when this constraint is enabled? So I can freely move inside, let's say, a logical area, but if I want to go upwards, I simply can, and the result is that this object is pinned down. So we can really happily assume that this is a locked object. And if I want to disable that behavior, I will simply uncheck this enable guy and I will turn off the complete constraint, and watch what happens. Now it all works. If I reset the position and enable the constraint, once again I have that freedom, but it won't exceed. It will seem like this guy is locked. Let me disable that just for a moment and select both of these guys and do a reset position. Here, if I move something like this, you will see two lines, and one is the actual constraint, and I will tell that constraint not to draw the clamp. So it's a little bit more easier on the eyes. Let's reset that controller, and the best solution here is actually to control this enable guy with the same espresso we have here. And for that we'll create one more of these checkbox guys. So let's manage our user data, and we'll simply add data, call this pin hand, so it's really logical and understandable, and once again it will be a boolean type of interface. So we have a pin hand, and here under express we will simply extract that pin hand, and in this case, once again, since this constraint is a tag, You cannot really move this enabled guy here. You'll have to drop the complete constraint and find that enabled property, and you can see it says basic here. It will also say basic or basic properties here. So let's drop that enable. So simple as that. Our checkbox will say to that constraint that is enabled. If that checkbox is unchecked, it will be disabled. So let's connect them and test the checkbox. So here under master controller, now if I move the hand, I can freely move it and the controller will not be locked down. But as soon as I check this pin hand, it won't let me exceed that value. So it's locked. We have a pinned hand. And those constraints work together. And if I select move everything here, also it will move everything since it's the logical thing to do. Now let's reset the position, and for this guy also reset position, and I also want that controller here, so I will slowly build all the controllers I need. I will once again right click on this guy and say uncheck this object, so we have just the name of our user data here, and I'll say show always. So now we have pretty nice setup of the arm. We have really solid deformations without doing actual weight painting, and the reason for it is a good topology. We'll have just a little bit of a job of correcting some sort of a minor things, and you can see rigging, and the rigs can become very, very complex and elaborate. You have to add the functionality you need. Don't add stuff without any reason. Always add it on purpose. Try to keep it nice, versatile, simple, and clean. So let's do a reset, and so we'll reset the position. We'll reset for this guy also. Just to make sure, we will reset the rotations, just in case it doesn't hurt. And the next thing we will do, we will actually build another setup. And we will build a setup for the hand. And this will be really, really interesting. And I will show you how you can recreate different setups. And since we have really good topology, we have the ability to unbind and bind the mesh again. Actually, you can bind multiple chains on the same mesh and you will get the skin deformer and the weight tag for each. But I really strongly suggest that all the joint hierarchies that will control the mesh, bind them in a single go. So it will create a single weight tag and a single skin deformer. So I will save this scene. We will just group these two guys like this, right click and make group, and I will save this scene and we can build the hand and finger setup in our next lesson.